The stove was choking on its own smoke when the cowboy pushed the contract across the table and asked if anyone here still trusted the girl in the kitchen. Smoke rolled back into the room, stinging eyes, turning the air thick and bitter. Ivy stood by the firebox, holding a strip of burning paper inside the flue, watching the flame bend the wrong way. Outside, the wind howled across the boards, rattling the windows hard enough to make the glass shiver. No one moved. Not when the man in the coat tapped the paper again. Not when the fire nearly died in her hands. So why didn't she step away? Stay with me. The red dirt road outside Dry Ridge Basin had a way of holding heat long after the sun had passed its peak. It pressed up through worn soles and into bone. Ivy Carter stood just off its edge, crouched low beside a thorny scrub bush that had no business holding fruit this late in the season. Still, she searched it. Her fingers moved slow, careful not to waste the strength it took to reach. When she found something, it was small, wrinkled, hard as a pebble. She turned it once between her thumb and forefinger, then slipped it into her mouth. She didn't rush the chewing. That would give her away. Juice barely came, just a faint bitterness that settled on her tongue. It wasn't food. Not really. But it was something to do with her jaw so her stomach wouldn't speak so loud. The wind shifted across the basin, dragging dust with it. It carried the dry scent of cattle and old grass, and somewhere far off, the creak of a loose gate hitting its post. That was when she heard the horse. Slow, measured, not in a hurry. She didn't turn. The sound stopped behind her, leather creaking as the animal settled its weight. Whoever it was stayed quiet long enough that the silence started to press. Then came the voice. "Can you cook?" It wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Ivy kept her back to him. She reached again into the bush, even though she already knew there was nothing left worth taking. "Depends," she said, her voice even, as if they were standing across a counter somewhere instead of a roadside ditch. "What you call cooking." The wind tugged at her skirt. She could feel his eyes on her, not rushed, not impatient, just waiting. She straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her hands onto the faded fabric. The stains on her fingers had turned a dull purple. "I call it keeping a fire steady," she went on, turning now, meeting his gaze without hurry. "Working dough without wasting flour, making sure men don't fall sick when the weather turns bad." The man sat tall in the saddle. Early 40s, maybe. Weather had cut lines into his face but not softened him. His coat was clean where it needed to be, worn where it didn't matter. The kind of man who fixed things instead of replacing them. Caleb Wyatt. She didn't know his name yet, but it would fit him. His eyes moved once, taking her in. Boots worn thin, hem caked in dust, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder that had seen better years and held everything she owned. He didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask why she was alone. "Well?" he said. Ivy lifted her chin just a fraction. "If there's flour, water, and a fire that draws," she said, "I can cook." A small pause passed between them. Not awkward, just measured. Then he nudged the horse forward, turning it toward the open stretch of land that rolled out past the basin. "Ranch is 18 miles north," he said. "Hayes Creek." He didn't look back to see if she would follow. Ivy adjusted the strap on her shoulder and stepped onto the road. She walked. The sun shifted higher, then started its slow drop again. Dust clung to her ankles. Once the horse slowed and Caleb's hand moved slightly on the reins, as if he might speak. He didn't. And she didn't ask. They reached the ranch just as the light began to soften. From a distance, Hayes Creek looked like most places that survived out here. Stubborn. A main house set firm against the wind. A long, low bunkhouse leaning just enough to show its age. Corrals stretched wide, fences patched more than replaced. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, but it didn't rise clean. It dragged sideways, smearing against the sky. Ivy noticed. They crossed the yard without ceremony. A couple of men near the trough paused mid-conversation, eyes drifting over her the way people look at something unexpected but not important. One of them let out a short breath through his nose. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "Wyatt bringin' strays now?" Another chuckled. "Hope she can do more than stand there." Ivy didn't stop walking. Caleb swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. He looped the reins over the post and headed toward the house. He didn't signal her, didn't introduce her. Just moved like she was expected to keep up. Inside, the air shifted. Warmer, thicker. The smell of old smoke sat low under the rafters. A pot simmered somewhere, but it carried a bitterness that came from something left too long on heat. At the far side of the room, a man leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, gray in his beard, hard in the eyes. Silas Boone. He looked Ivy up and down, slow, deliberate. "That what you found out there?" he said, not to her, but to Caleb. "Roadside help?" Caleb reached for a tin cup, poured coffee from the pot without answering. He took a sip, didn't flinch, but didn't take another either. "She says she can cook," he said. Silas let out a short laugh. "Everybody says that till they ruin a week's worth of flour." Ivy stood near the table, not moving forward, not stepping back. Her eyes drifted once around the room, the soot ring around the stove, the damp corner where a flour sack leaned too close to the wall, the way the smoke curled low instead of lifting. Then she set her canvas bag down. The sound of it hitting the wood was soft, but it carried. "I'll need a clean bucket," she said, like she'd already been hired, "and something to scrape ash." Silas straightened. "You'll need permission first," he said. She looked at him then, not sharp, not soft either. "Then you'd better decide quick," she said, "because that stove's working against you." A few of the men in the doorway shifted, interest creeping in where laughter had been. Silas opened his mouth, ready with something sharper. Caleb spoke first. "Let her work." That was all. No defense, no explanation, just enough. Silas held his stare a second longer, then pushed off the frame with a grunt. "Fine," he muttered. "But when she burns through my supplies, she's your problem." Ivy didn't answer. She stepped toward the stove instead, already reaching for the tools she'd need. Behind her, the men watched, some amused, some waiting, no one stepping forward to help. And Caleb Wyatt, standing off to the side with his cup in hand, said nothing at all. Outside, the wind shifted again, brushing low across the yard. Inside, something had already started to change, and no one yet could say why. The stove gave off a dull heat that didn't carry. It sat there breathing wrong, like a tired animal that hadn't found its rhythm in years. Ivy stood in front of it, one hand resting lightly against the iron edge, feeling for something most folks never thought to notice. Behind her, boots shifted against the floorboards. Someone chuckled low. "She thinking too hard already," one of the men muttered. Silas moved past her with a scrape of his heel, reaching for a pot. He set it down harder than needed, the metal ringing sharp in the room. "You planning to stare it back to life?" he said. "Or you gonna cook?" Ivy didn't answer. She crouched instead, pulling open the small ash door beneath the firebox. A soft spill of gray dust fell onto the floor. Too much of it, packed thick, smothering. She reached in with bare fingers, breaking it apart slowly. The heat bit her skin, but she didn't pull back. From the doorway, old Carter Pike watched, quiet as ever, one shoulder resting against the frame. "She'll learn," someone said. "Or she won't." The words weren't spoken, but they sat there anyway. Ivy stood again, brushing her hands against her skirt. Then she crossed the room without asking, moving toward the corner where the flour sack leaned against the wall. She pressed it once with her palm. The bottom didn't give. She tipped it slightly. Damp, holding moisture where it shouldn't. The kind that turns good flour into something useless over time. Silas noticed. Been that way 10 years, he said. Still makes bread. Ivy glanced at him, just once. Not good bread, she said. A few men shifted. Someone let out a short breath, like he might laugh, but thought better of it. Silas folded his arms. Well, he said, we'll see what kind you make. Ivy moved back to the table. She opened her canvas bag, pulling out a small, worn notebook. The edges were soft from years of handling. She flipped it open with care, her thumb brushing past pages filled with tight, neat lines. Not recipes, not the way most folks kept them. Notes, amounts, adjustments, small observations written like someone trying to remember what worked and what didn't. She set it down near the edge of the table, then reached for the flour. Water next, a splash from the bucket. Not too much. Her hands worked steady. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just quiet attention to what was in front of her. Silas leaned against the wall, watching with a look that had already decided how this would end. The first batch went into the pan. The stove gave a low, uneven heat, too strong near the front, dead at the back. Ivy didn't adjust it yet. She waited. The smell came first. A good start, then something off. The tops browned quicker than they should. The edges held. The center lagged behind. She pulled them out. Silas stepped forward, reaching for one before it had cooled. He broke it open with his thumbs. Steam curled up. The inside sagged, pale and wet. A laugh came from the door. This time no one held it back. Told you, Silas said, handing it off. Same as always. The biscuit made its way through a couple of hands before landing back on the table. Ivy picked it up. She didn't throw it away. She broke it again, smaller this time, studying the crumb like it might tell her something. Her thumb pressed lightly into the center. Too much moisture trapped. Not enough draw from the back of the stove. She turned slightly, looking at the firebox. Heat's wrong, she said, more to herself than anyone else. Too much at the mouth. Silas snorted. It's a stove, he said. Not a puzzle. Ivy didn't answer. She flipped another page in her notebook, made a quick mark with a short pencil pulled from behind her ear. Then she reached for the ash door again. This time she cleared more, thinned the bed, let the air move. From the corner of the room, Caleb stood with his cup, watching without making it known. His gaze followed her hands, the way she tested things instead of guessing. The second batch went in quieter. Less heat. More time. No one spoke while they waited. When Ivy pulled them out, she didn't say a word. She just set them down. Silas didn't move. One of the younger hands, Reed Dalton, stepped forward, half curious now, half still amused. He reached out, then hesitated, glancing back toward Silas. Silas shrugged. Go on, he said. Won't kill you. Reed picked one up, broke it open. Steam rose again, but this time it held. Firm, even. He took a bite. Didn't say anything right away. Just chewed. Then nodded once, almost to himself, like he didn't mean for anyone else to see it. Caleb set his cup down. He walked forward, took one without asking, and ate it the same way. Slow, thoughtful. He reached for another. That was all. Ivy watched him for a second longer than necessary, then turned back to the stove. Behind her, the room had gone quieter. Not silent, but different. Silas shifted his weight, pushing off the wall. Don't get comfortable, he muttered. One good batch don't mean much. Ivy nodded once, already reaching for the next measure of flour. "I know," she said. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing along the side of the house. The chimney gave a low, uneven sound, like it wasn't quite sure which way to pull. Inside, Ivy adjusted the fire, just a little. No one said it out loud, but something in that room had started to lean her way. It didn't show itself all at once. Not in words, not in any open agreement. It showed up in smaller things. The next morning, the coffee didn't bite as hard going down. No one mentioned it, but cups were emptied instead of left half full on the table. By noon, the bread from the night before was gone. Not scraped into the waste pail. Gone. Ivy moved through the kitchen like she had already been there a long time. She lifted the flour sacks one by one, dragging scraps of old wood from the side shed and sliding them underneath to raise each sack off the floor. The damp corner stayed empty after that. Silas watched from the doorway, jaw set tight. "You planning to rebuild the whole place?" he asked. Ivy didn't look up. She was tying a strip of cloth around a hook, hanging the salt pork higher, where air could pass around it instead of settling thick and still. "No," she said. "Just fixing what's already here." Outside, the yard carried on the same as always. Boots in dust, gates creaking, horses shifting weight in their stalls. But by the third day, the men started coming in a little earlier for meals. Reed Dalton lingered once after breakfast, leaning his shoulder against the wall. "That stew yesterday," he said, like he was talking about the weather. "Didn't sit heavy." Ivy wiped her hands on a cloth. "Then you're not used to eating right," she said, not unkindly. Reed let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, and pushed himself off the wall. From the far end of the table, old Carter Pike watched it all without comment. His eyes followed the way Ivy measured things, not by guess, but by count. How much flour went into the dough? How much stayed in the sack? What was left at the end of each meal? That night, Ivy opened her small notebook again. Flour, beans, salt pork. She marked each line with care. Not what had been used, what remained. Caleb passed by the doorway once, on his way out toward the barn. He slowed just enough to glance at the page. Columns of numbers, small notes written beside them. He didn't ask. But the next morning, a stack of split kindling appeared beside the stove. Each piece cut shorter than before, thin enough to catch quick and hold steady. Ivy noticed. She didn't say anything. Out in the lower pen, the cattle told their own story. 9 young heifers stood apart from the main herd, not weak enough to drop, but not strong enough to carry weight through winter. Caleb leaned on the fence, arms folded across the top rail. His eyes moved across their backs, the way their ribs showed when they shifted. "Thinking of selling them," he said, not turning. Ivy stood beside him, a bucket in her hands. "Then you'll have less mouths to feed," she said. "And less to lose," Caleb replied. She set the bucket down. Inside was a mix of scraps, bread ends, a little bran, warm water thinned with what was left from the morning's milk. "They're not finished," she said. Caleb glanced at her then. "They might be," he said. "Winter don't wait for things to catch up." Ivy stepped into the pen. The nearest heifer lifted its head, ears twitching. She tipped the bucket, letting the mixture fall slow into the trough. The first animal sniffed it, then turned away. Ivy didn't move, didn't call, didn't push. "Too thin," she said quietly, more to herself than him. She picked the bucket back up, walking out without hurry. The next day, she tried again. Less water, more grain. 2 heifers stepped forward. Not eager, just curious. By the third day, all 9 had their heads down. From the fence, Caleb watched without comment. Late that afternoon, a rider came in from the south road. His coat was too clean for ranch work. His horse carried no dust. Cliff Mercer. He dismounted without looking toward the corrals, heading straight for the house like he owned the place. Inside, he spread his papers across the table without asking. "Accounts haven't changed," he said, tapping a line with his finger. "Still owed, still overdue." Caleb stood across from him, hands resting flat against the wood. Mercer's eyes drifted toward the kitchen. Ivy stood near the stove, working dough between her palms. "That her?" Mercer asked. Caleb didn't answer. Mercer gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A cook don't fix numbers," he said. "You sell the weak stock now, you cut your losses." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing hard against the side of the house. Caleb's jaw shifted slightly. "We'll manage," he said. Mercer tapped the paper again. "Not with hope," he said, "and not with kitchen thinking." From the doorway, old Carter Pike cleared his throat once, low and quiet, but didn't step forward. Mercer gathered his papers, sliding them back into his case. "You've got time," he said, heading for the door. "Not much." He paused, glancing once more toward the kitchen. A ranch don't survive on a cook's ideas. Then he stepped out into the wind. The door shut behind him. Inside, the room held still for a long moment. Ivy didn't look up. She finished shaping the dough, set it aside, and reached for her notebook again. Outside, the sky had started to turn. Not dark yet, but close enough to feel it coming. The wind changed first. It didn't howl. Not yet. It pressed low across the land, sliding along the fences and under the eaves like something testing its way in. The sky stayed pale, but the light turned thin, drained of warmth. Ivy stood near the stove, one hand resting on the table, watching the smoke. It didn't rise. It flattened, then curled back down along the roofline outside the window. She made a mark in her notebook. Silas noticed. "Writing won't stop the cold," he said. Ivy closed the book. "No," she said, "but it tells me when it's coming." By dusk, the first flakes started to fall. Light at first, slow enough that they seemed almost careful. Then the wind shifted again, harder this time. The chimney answered before anyone spoke. Smoke pushed back into the firebox in a sudden gray breath. The room filled with it in seconds, bitter and thick. Reed coughed, stepping back. "What the—" Silas moved fast, yanking the stove door open wider. "Damper's stuck," he snapped. "Told you this thing was—" "Close it." Ivy's voice cut through the room, not loud, but steady. Silas hesitated. "Close it," she said again. For a moment it looked like he might argue. Then he shut the door. The fire dulled, smoke still curling low along the ceiling. Ivy reached for a scrap of old newspaper near the shelf. She twisted it tight, struck a match, and lit the end. The flame caught quick, small, and sharp. She opened the flue just enough and held the burning paper inside. No one spoke. The flame flickered, then stretched upward. The smoke shifted. Not much, just enough. "Cold air's pushing down," Ivy said. "Chimney's colder than the room." Silas frowned, watching now instead of speaking. She fed the fire again. Small pieces, thin kindling. Not the thick logs stacked beside the wall. "Slow," she said. "Let it pull." Outside, the wind rose. It didn't wait for night. By the time the last light slipped behind the ridge, the storm had settled in. Snow came sideways, driven hard enough to sting against skin. The yard disappeared first. Then the fence line. Inside, the room held tight. Bowls were filled without waste. No one took more than they needed. Coffee was poured carefully, stretched thin but still warm. Ivy moved between the stove and the table, counting without looking like she was counting. Caleb stood near the door, watching the windows as they rattled in their frames. A crash came from outside, wood against wood. "The lower pen," Reed said, already pulling his coat on. Caleb didn't stop him. "I'll come," he said, reaching for his gloves. Ivy set the ladle down. "Take the rope from the wall," she said, "and move them to the haystack. Wind's breaking there." Caleb paused, just long enough to look at her. Then he nodded once. The door opened, and the storm came in with them. Cold, sharp, immediate. It closed just as fast. Silas stood near the stove, arms tight across his chest. "They won't make it," he muttered. "Not in this." Ivy didn't answer. She added another small piece of wood to the fire, adjusting it until the flame caught clean. Minutes stretched. The room held its breath. Then the door opened again. Caleb stepped in first, shoulders dusted white. Reed behind him, breath coming hard. "They're in," Reed said, stamping snow from his boots. "Packed tight by the hay." Caleb shut the door with his shoulder, leaning against it for a second before stepping back into the room. His eyes moved once to Ivy. She gave a small nod. Nothing more. Hours passed that way. The storm didn't ease. It pressed harder, rattling the boards, testing every seam of the house. Near midnight, another knock came. Not on the door. Against it. Caleb opened it a crack, just enough to see through the white. Cliff Mercer stood outside, coat pulled tight, face cut red from the cold. "Road's gone," he said, pushing his way in. "Didn't make it back to town." He shook snow from his hat, looking around the room like he expected to find it empty. Instead, he found them all there, warm, fed, standing. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Still time," he said, pulling papers from inside his coat. "Sign it now. Storm like this, those cattle won't last." No one moved. The fire crackled softly. Ivy wiped her hands on a cloth, then stepped forward. She set her notebook on the table, opened it, turned it toward Caleb. Lines of numbers, days, portions, feed, not guesses, plans. Mercer glanced at it, then back at her. "That's kitchen math," he said. From the corner, old Carter Pike spoke, his voice low but clear. "That's winter math." The room went still. Caleb looked at the paper in Mercer's hand, then at the notebook, then at Ivy. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. Caleb reached out, took Mercer's paper, and slid it back across the table. "We do it her way." The words settled in the room like something final. Mercer didn't argue, not right away. He gathered his papers slowly, eyes moving once more toward the kitchen, toward the stove, toward the steady rhythm that hadn't broken. Then he turned away. Outside, the storm kept coming. Inside, no one spoke for a long time. But the decision had already been made, and there was no taking it back. The storm didn't break that night. It stayed, pressed against the walls, clawed at the roof, filled every space outside with white and wind. Time moved differently in it. Slower, tighter. Inside, nothing was wasted. Ivy moved through the kitchen without hurry, but never still. A scoop of beans measured out by hand. A strip of salt pork cut thinner than before. Coffee stretched with hot water, poured steady so no one noticed the change. No one complained. Not once. Reed started showing up early, not waiting to be called. Old Carter Pike took to stacking the kindling by the stove before bed, each piece cut to the same size Ivy used. Even Silas stopped speaking so much. He stayed near the wall, watching the fire like it might teach him something he'd missed all these years. On the third day, the wind eased just enough to hear the cattle again. Low sounds, not panic, just restless. Caleb stepped out before first light, pulling his coat tight. Snow reached near his knees in places. The sky had cleared to a hard blue, the kind that comes after a storm has said its piece. The haystack held. The 9 heifers stood close together, their breath rising in slow clouds. They looked thinner, but they were standing, heads lifting when he approached, not lying down in the cold. He stayed there a long moment, then turned back toward the house. By afternoon, word had started to move, not by letters, not by writers, just the way things travel out here, through men who see something they don't understand and carry it with them. A wagon came first, then another. Neighbors from across the basin, men who had laughed before, men who had said it wouldn't hold. They stepped into the yard slower this time. One of them, Orrin Phelps, stood near the fence, hat in his hands. "Lost 2, he said quietly, nodding toward the lower pen. "Couldn't keep 'em on their feet." Caleb didn't answer. Orrin's eyes drifted toward the house. "Heard you kept yours," he added. Caleb looked at him then. "We did." Orrin nodded once, not surprised, not anymore. Inside, Ivy was at the table, notebook open, pencil moving in short lines. She didn't look up when the door opened. Boots stepped in, then stopped. Orrin cleared his throat. "How you keep flour dry?" he asked, like it mattered more than anything else he could have said. Ivy finished the line she was writing before she answered. "Off the floor," she said, air moving underneath, not against the wall. Orrin nodded, taking it in like it was something heavier than words. "And the cattle?" "Feed smaller," she said. "More often. Keep them moving, not standing still in wind." No more than that. No long explanation. Orrin stepped back, holding on to those few sentences like they were enough. By the time the sun dropped, the yard had emptied again. Only tracks left in the snow. Inside, the house felt different. Not warmer, stronger. Silas moved to the stove, adjusting the wood without being told. He didn't look at Ivy. "You kept it steady," he said after a while, voice low. "Didn't think that was possible." Ivy didn't answer. She didn't need to. Late that evening, another set of tracks cut through the yard. Caleb saw them first. Cliff Mercer stepped in, same coat, same papers tucked under his arm. But he didn't walk the same way. Not as certain. He paused just inside the door, eyes moving across the room. The fire, the table, the men. Then the kitchen. Ivy stood there, sleeves rolled, flour on her hands. Mercer didn't smile this time. He set his papers down slower. "Road's open enough," he said. "Figured I'd check on things." No one spoke. Caleb stepped forward, resting his hand on the table. "Go ahead," he said. Mercer glanced outside once more, toward the pen. "I saw them," he said, still standing. He looked back at Caleb. "Didn't expect that." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. Mercer gathered his papers without opening them. "Come spring," he said, "we'll talk numbers again." He hesitated, then added, quieter, "Different ones." And just like that, he left. The door closed behind him. The room held still. For a moment, no one moved. Then Caleb turned. His eyes found Ivy. She stood the same as she had from the start. Not waiting, not asking, just there. He took a step forward. "She didn't just cook," he said. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It carried anyway. "She kept this place standing," he went on. "Every one of us." No one argued. No one laughed. Reed looked down at the table. Old Carter Pike gave a small nod, like he'd been expecting this all along. Silas stood by the stove, hands resting on the edge. He didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. Caleb reached for a chair and pulled it out from the table. Not at the end. Beside him. He didn't say anything when he did it, just left it there. Ivy looked at it for a moment, then at him. Something passed between them. Quiet. Unspoken. She stepped forward and sat. No one objected. Outside, the last of the wind moved across the basin, lighter now. The storm had taken what it wanted. Inside, the table felt full in a different way. Later, when the room had emptied and the fire had settled low, Ivy opened her canvas bag. From the bottom, she took out a small handful of dried berries, the same kind she had eaten by the road. She held them in her palm for a long moment, then set them down on the table. She didn't eat them, didn't need to. The room was warm, the shelves were full, and for the first time in a long while, there was nowhere else she needed to go. If you stood where Ivy once stood, dust on your boots, nothing in your pocket but a few dried berries, you might have done the same. You might have kept your head up, even when no one offered a hand. You might have chosen to work instead of asking, to build something quiet instead of chasing something loud. Out here, people don't say much about love, not the kind that shows up in big words. It shows up in smaller things. A chair pulled out without a speech, firewood cut to the right size, a plate kept warm long after the others have gone to bed. And maybe that's the kind that lasts. Ivy didn't arrive looking for a future. She came looking for a way through the next day. But somewhere between the cold mornings and the long nights, she found something steadier than hope. She found a place where her work mattered, where someone saw it, where she didn't have to prove herself twice. Maybe that's what we all want in the end. Not to be saved, just to be seen and trusted to stand. If you've ever had to start over with less than you deserved, or if you're still standing in the middle of it, tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know. And if stories like this feel close to home, there are more waiting just down the trail. Quiet ones, strong ones, the kind you carry with you long after they end.